Hey everybody, wanted to take a second to pump this out based on all the calls we're getting on frozen soybeans. We'll try to get to as many areas as we can to help you make decisions on replant, but I thought maybe we could grab the camera here and spend a few minutes talking about some things that you would observe in your field to maybe make that decision on the replant. And again, we'll be hitting the road for the next 2 or 3 days trying to help everybody with that decision. For the most part, the heaviest damage and the most calls are coming in on the Interstate 80 corridor, coming across northern Ford, Livingston County, all the way to the Indiana border. That's where the heaviest amount of damage is. And situation, it's not just one night, it's in this case almost 4 nights of frost that are getting us in trouble. But even with that said, today we're standing here in DeWitt County field in DeWitt County, Illinois, and it's got considerable amount of damage to it. Now, most of the fields we've looked at, there's also a planting element. So it looks like the worst hit is the soybeans planted from the 4th to the 7th of April. They were a little bigger, and the bigger the bean, the harder it is for it to take a frost like this. Definitely the no-till looks to be taking it a little bit hit harder than the tilled ground, or as we'll show you here, some of the strip till. And also the cover crop. If the cover crop was heavy enough to protect it, we did pretty good. If it was the heavy cover crop wasn't heavy enough to protect it, then we got damage there as well. And it looks like, especially to the north in that corridor where all the frost is, we had too low a breeze. So that I noticed the differences between here where we don't have that much damage in DeWitt County compared to the north. We got as cold, but up there it was clear, cold, and very little breeze. So the little breeze that you did have made a difference. So if anything blocked that breeze, the kill was harder. So your west and north boundaries along the grass, those outside 3 rows, no matter whether you're no-till or conventional till, a lot of cases are smoked. If your row cleaners weren't floating and you valley tilled and pushed residue up, as soon as you have a stretch of what we call valley till, the beans are dead in there, meaning the air current couldn't get through there. And then in the no-till, of course, with the more residue that you have, that also not only keeping the ground a little cooler, but at the same time restricting some of the air current. So the freeze got lower on the stem, got down here below the cotyledons. So we're going to walk through some of that in this particular plot because we have strip till, no-till, and cover crops in here, and it's going to help you make some of those decisions on how bad that situation is. So start off with when you walk out in the field, some of these fields, it's a little bit of a no-brainer, right? The beans look refried, they're melted to the ground, no survival, or the survival is very poor. You can see that pretty quick. You can make the decisions there whether you're going to replant or not. That's a small percentage of them, though. Most of the fields that we're looking at, we're digging up what we still think are viable populations in that 60 to 90 to 100,000 population range. What I want to make sure with this video that nobody jumps the gun too fast as far as to replant. What is a dead bean and not? Now, like I said, those that are melted to the ground, that's pretty easy. But those that are burnt off down to the cotyledon, that's not quite as easy. So we'll get in close and we'll lay out those differences. So the first thing we've got to do is get actual numbers so we can separate out from our existing stand what is for sure dead, what may not be, or is, we don't know for sure. But we need actual numbers. Poor stand, low stand, we can't put them into a calculator to decide to replant. On my narrow row beans, I like the hula hoop. We use 28-inch diameter hula hoop and just throw it where it lands, centered on the 2 rows, count them, throw it again, and keep writing those counts down and checking for it. You can still use the hula hoop in wide rows. You can throw the hoop and then go ahead and stretch out a tape if you want, but it keeps you randomly picking through the field, through the area, so you get a good list of samples. You aren't just walking to one dead row or one live row, depending on what your mood is. And once we identify that, like we are right here in 10 thousandths of an acre, I have what was 180,000 plants, and now we need to decide which ones are carcasses and which ones could be viable if we just give them time. So in this case, we're representing 10 thousandths of an acre. Again, count the carcasses and all. Where's my population? In this case, it was at 180. Now we need to go down through, and some of them are really burnt and refried to the ground. You can write them off, but a lot of these are marginal. What I like to do then is to check for turgor pressure, and what we'll be doing is grabbing right below the cotyledons and squeezing the stem to see if it's soft or not. Okay, and those soft ones are dead. You can just pull them out if you want and throw them off to the side as you're making your counts. The soft ones are dead. The other ones are still questionable. So let's take a closer look at that. So here we're looking at 4 specimens. We're trying to make the call: are they gone, or could they recover in time? And like I said, I like to check for the turgor pressure right here below the cotyledon. And if that's firm right there, there's a good chance this growing point's still alive and we can rebuild from that growing point. If we're firm right here, even if the cotyledons look tough, we still have the possibility to rebuild from that point. So squeezing along there, you say that's one that we don't know. It could be good. This one here, you notice the difference in color there a little bit, and this is soft, so I can squeeze that. So these 2 plants don't look that much different from the top. They both look pretty tough. But when we tip them over on the back side, this one is soft right here. I can squish that. There's no turgor pressure in here. This one is going to be dead. It may take it another 3 days to dry up, but this one I would count it in the dead column. Where this one has turgor pressure right up in here, this one can regrow. If we look at this one here, it looks pretty burnt. We tip it over and it too is soft. So a situation where it's soft right under here, and it's going to die. Now, when you're out here some years right after the frost, 24 hours or maybe even 12 hours after the frost, what we would do is split this stem and put a hand lens to it. And if there's dark discoloration down here below this node, that would also be a chance that the xylem and phloem are froze down here and you're not going to rebuild it. We can rebuild from that node. So as we go down through here, this one is solid again, and that's going to be one that you would put in the maybe column. Now, why do I say maybe column? If we go back to our plant here that's got good turgor pressure, but a lot of damage, okay? We still don't know, even with the turgor pressure, we don't know if these 2 nodes are viable or not. The only way we're going to know is to get some GDUs to put out new growth. And here we are shooting this on Friday. With the weather forecast as it is, by Wednesday or Thursday we should have new growth. Last year we told you the same thing, take 3 or 4 days, but we didn't get any GDUs, so 3 or 4 days it looked normal. It just looked like the same as it did the day after the frost. But if the forecast is right, by Wednesday or Thursday we should see new growth pushing out at this cotyledon node down here. Most likely we won't see it here because this stem is soft up here, so this is toast. We're going to see it down here, and we're going to rebuild that plant. At that point, when we see new growth, this one is alive, and we can put it in the live column. It's one of the reasons why we're dragging our feet a little bit on some of these fields, because we have 70,000 that we think are going to make it, another 30,000 that are on the line. That's going to put you at 90,000, and again, we would take 90,000 April planted beans over these May planted beans, so we want to stay on top of it. But we put it in the maybe column. Last year we showed you beans that had frosted down to the cotyledons, and 20 days after the frost we still just had cotyledons and no new growth. They were still green. There was enough photosynthetic activity here to keep the bean alive at that point, but the nodes right here were gone. So we got to have regrowth to put them in the win column. So that's the biggest factor that we got to deal with out here. So again, some of these are just fried to the ground, but some of them will surprise you. Some of them, even with the cotyledons burnt hard with the stiff stem here, have the ability to come back. And I know that seems crazy, but you might even do that on some of your fields, is flag some of these marginal plants even if you replant the whole field. And I do realize time is of the essence when we're trying to replant, but we're also the May 12th, right? So we have plenty of time to put these beans in for normal bean conditions. We're going to miss our window in early flowering, but we're not going to miss our window on normal yields. We got a lot of time here yet to put this thing back together. So be careful of what we do. We're going to look at some other things of how this frost changed based on the environment, and then, which is kind of cool, but it helped maybe answer some frustration out there that I'm hearing from different growers. So we're looking at some of the cultural practices and how they're showing up in this frost damage that we're dealing with. And in this particular block, for instance, we have strip till. We're strip tilling into no-till corn stalks, stripped last fall, freshened this spring, and then we planted it. And as we look at the damage here, out in the cover crop, there's hardly any frost damage. You have to look to find it. And the unifoliates are solid, plants are good. As we transition in out of the cover, then we see a lot of frost damage. All the trifoliates and the unifoliates have been knocked off, and there's a lot of damage that's been done. Now, the cover crop did break the wind, so it should have froze harder, but in this case it was heavy enough it protected it. It kept that temperature where it didn't hurt the bean. Out here in the open we got it. Now, while there is a lot of frost damage here in the strip till, it gets worse in the no-till. Let's take a look at that. So in this plot here, this is strictly no-till into cover. And right up here where we have no cover in the beginning of the plot, hardly no beans. So as we look inside the cover, again, the beans look pretty good. As we come out of the cover, there's a lot here that aren't going to make it. Just that difference in the residue out here kept the ground cooler, blocked the wind. That did block the wind as well, but again, it was enough of a canopy cover over there that it did protect those beans. Now there's a difference in size between my no-till cover crop beans and my strip till cover crop beans. Now the no-till beans are just a little bit smaller than the strip till in the cover crop, but they both survive really well. There's no sign of frost damage on either one of these plants. Usually the bigger they are in a frost, the tougher we have, but in this case the cover crop did protect them. So here I want to actually do a count for you, and we're looking at two different practices. This is strip till and this is no-till. Same day planting, of course same maturity, bean, everything else. These were planted on the 4th of April. And we definitely have more visible damage anyway in the no-till than we do in the strip till. And we can row the strip till. So we're going to do a real tight focus in on 10,000th of an acre and actually figure out what the survivability is of both of these rows. So here we are in the strip till pass. Again, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to squeeze right below that cotyledon to see if it's soft. That one's soft, so he's coming out. That one's firm. That one's soft. That one's soft. Firm. Soft. Firm. 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 One's good. One's good. That one looks tough, but he's good. That one's soft. So we throw them away, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll call it 8. So there's 80,000 plants there that are very viable. We would have to come back on Wednesday to verify like this one and this one, whether they're going to hang with us. But if we take them out, then we're back down to 60,000 in this section. So here we're 30 inches away in no-till. Again, we pick the soft ones, firm, firm, soft, firm, soft, 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 soft. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got 50,000 here with the potential to survive. Again, with the potential to survive, we still want to come back and see new growth out of these in 3 or 4 days. But then you're going to do a number of these counts to come up with how consistent is your population out there. So when it comes to making good decisions on this frost damage, the pest team's got to get out there and got to do a lot of scouting. A lot of fields, for sure, it's going to be the outside 3 or 4 rows around the field that are going to have to be replanted. going to have to find some 4-row planters to fill that in. But the rest of the ground, topography is going to make a difference. How we set our row cleaners, whether we're no-till. Don't assume anything. Let's get across all these early planted acres. Again, those planted in that 4th through April 7th time frame seem to be taking the hardest hit. The stuff in the no-till taking a harder hit than the stuff in the tilled. But if the till has got some valley where you're pushing with those row cleaners, you'll see that damage there too. You got to get good numbers. So if you're sitting there on potential good numbers, and potential good numbers for early planted beans is going to be somewhere between that 60 and 100,000 range, meaning that tearing up a 60,000 stand and replanting it may not be the best idea. If you remember back in 2015, how many of those 55,000 early planted beans at 55,000 still produced over 80 bushel to the acre. So population, we really don't know how low we can go with the bean. Last year we showed you in our plots at 33 and 34,000, we were still in the mid to upper 70s in bushels. The challenge in those low populations is you got to control the weeds, and controlling weeds below 90,000 gets a little tougher. So that's kind of comes to each field. Can you control the weeds? What's your chemistry? Can you get that late push that's coming through? If you can't control the weeds, for instance, if they're non-GMO, something like that, then you're going to be having to make decisions about replanting or not. Now, when it comes to replanting, the question is, do we tear up the whole field and start over? In some cases, yeah. And in some cases, it's as simple as changing chemistry and go ahead and plant your enlist beans into where you had your dicamba beans and then just smoke it out with the 2,4-D, or smoke them out with 2,4-D and go ahead and plant your enlist beans. In a lot of cases, though, that creates a little bit of a conflict between your seed supplier for free replant. If they don't have an enlist bean and you can't swap it back and forth, you're going to be stuck with the same chemistry and come back in there. So if we go in here and we thicken this stand up and we say, okay, we got 60,000 and I don't think I can hold the weeds, so I want to go put another 60 to 80,000 interplanted into it. That 60 to 80,000 will get you weed control along with the 60 that you have out there. And remember, you're going to kill about a third of them as you're going through there with the planter, just interplanting into it if you try to set off the row, because you're going to drive over some of these plants. So you'll get the weed control. But when you interplant into it, on our calculator for replant, where it says destroy existing stand, you got to plug in at least 2 bushel worth of beans is what it's going to cost you. So when we interplant into existing stands, we usually drop the yield 1 to 3 bushel. So plug 2 bushel in for tearing out the old crop. So, well, I didn't tear it out, I just planted into it. No, but that's what it's going to cost you because those beans aren't going to bush out. And that could be the equivalent of what you're going to spend on extra herbicide if you don't interplant into it. But interplanting into it for yield increase is probably not going to happen. Interplanting into it for weed control is. Now, what if I just smoke the whole stand and start over? I think you can do that too. Bring the soil finisher in or whatever you want to do to take that stand out. And right now, again, we're looking at 100% normal yield. So we got plenty of room here and time to work with this. You won't get the premium that you would get for the early flowering. Anything that we're tearing up now and putting back in, it's going to flower that first, second week in July. And still not a bad deal. A lot of you guys only did a third of your beans early and a third late. But be careful not to be out there interplanting into 80 or 90,000 good viable plants that would go ahead and flower for us, and then not let them bush out and make that flower. So that's the main call of today. Now, by Wednesday or Thursday, you are going to know. And already today, guys are calling in, boy, what a difference 24 hours made. They can now row the beans again. If the beans can be rowed again, that tells you they're not dead. They're starting to come back. We should see some pretty decent evidence by Wednesday or Thursday whether this crop is here. Now, I do realize, guys, saying, well, it could rain for 10 days and I'll be planting them 10 days later. But at the same time, 10 days later still isn't that big of a threat for soybeans, right? Meaning we got a lot of time and room here to work with these in the field. Main thing for this video and pumping it out here is check the turgor pressure, look at those beans, make sure you're not making a decision to tear up 70, 80, 90, 100,000 plants if it's a clean field and you think you can handle the weeds. If it's a weed mess, you're probably going to want to make sure you get a good enough stand to manage that. So if you got 60,000 out here and you're going to go in there and interplant another 60,000, remember the 60,000 that's out there, you're probably going to wipe out about a third of it when you interplant into it. So make that adjustment. If you're going to go back in there and put some beans and get the population high enough that you get that weed control. Now, it's a little bit different. If you 30-inch rows, you're going to set off 15. You're still going to be driving on some of those beans, and you're going to lose some of that stand. You get down around 40,000, it might be better just take them out and start over with a full stand. I would not back your maturities up. Keep your maturities where they are and just charge on. But make sure if you're going to interplant, one, you're getting enough with your interplant to get your weed control, and that you're not interplanting into what could potentially be an 80 bushel stand yet.